Hello, we're on page 14 and we're on problem number 2. For all of the following problems, consider the points A through N on the previous page. So we're constantly going to flip back and forth on the pages because the paper is on the other page, so please bear with me. For problem number A, it asks you to identify all of the points that have an x-coordinate of 3 and 1/3. So we're going to go back to the paper previously and look for the coordinate 3 and 1/3. And the reason why we are doing 1/3, if you notice, it's sectioned into thirds. So I'm going to actually section this so you guys can see 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. So that's what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to section this so that's easier to find each point. So this one is 1/3, 2/3, and this one would be 3/3. So same thing here. This is 1 and 1/3, 1 and 2/3. This would be 3/3, that's fine. This one is 2 and 1/3, 3 and 1/3. Oh, 2 and 2/3. 2 and 2/3, and this is 2 and 3/3 or 3. Right here we have 2 and 1/3, so this is 3 and 1/3. 3 and 2/3. This is 3 and 3/3 or 4. Right here we have 3, 4, because now we're at 4. You see that? 4 and 1/3, 4 and 2/3, and we have 4 and 3/3. Over here we have 5 and 1/3, and 5 and 2/3, and 5 and 3/3 for the very last one. And on the side, I'm going to do the same thing, just with a different pen. So right here, and I'm going to mark it on the side so that it's a lot more clear. So this one is 1/3. This is 2/3. This is 3/3 or 1. This one is 1 and 1/3. 1 and 2/3. This one would be 1 and 3/3, but we don't need to write that. So next we have 2 and 1/3. 2 and 2/3. Then we have 3, and then we have 3 and 1/3. 3 and 2/3. The last one is 3 and 3/3, and then we have 4 and 1/3. 4 and 2/3. 4 and 3/3. So that's 5, and then we have 5 and 1/3. 5 and 2/3. Okay, and the last one would be 5 and 3/3. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you guys can see the numbers and have a chance to copy this. So this would be a good time for you to pause so that you can look at it very closely. Okay, so I labeled all my points, and I'm going to read that question again. It says, identify all the points that have an x-coordinate of 3 and 1/3. So this is my x-coordinate right here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the x-coordinate that has 3 and 1/3. So, right, we have 3 and 1/3. So all of these coordinates right here are 3 and 1/3. So all of these right here, these little dots, and what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to label them all and find the coordinates for each one. So all of this one is 3 and 1/3. So J is 3 and 1/3. I is 3 and 1/3. H is 3 and 1/3. D is also 3 and 1/3. Okay, so that's their x coordinate. And I know that because they're all at 3 and 1/3 right here. And that's why I wrote 3 and 1/3 for all of them. Now, if I want to find the y coordinate, I would go like this and find each one. So right here we have 3 and 1/3, and right here is 1/3. So I would write my y coordinate as 1/3. If I move up, I can solve for I. And for I, they're asking me to find 3 and 1/3. And on the side, I know that that one is equal to 1 and 2/3. Okay. And then for H, I'm looking at the side, and I know the side is 2 and 2/3. If you don't have a ruler and you like how I'm marking it, you can just use a plain piece of paper. So I could use just this paper to help me line it up. That makes it easier. That's a good trick to use if you can't see it all the way. Because sometimes I make mistakes, so I make sure that, my lines are straight so that it's all lined up and I'm not going like this and accidentally, marking a different mark. So now I'm moving this up and I see D, and D looks like it's lined at 5. So my y coordinate is going to be 5. Okay? Now I'm going to kind of put little oranges around it so that I know this one belongs to the orange one. Because there's so many coordinates. Look at all of those. How crazy. So I'm going to turn my page. And right here, I'm going to mark down my coordinates that have 3 1/3, which is D, H, I, and J. Okay? Now the next one, it asks me to identify all of the points that have a y coordinate of 2 2/3. Now, y coordinate is this line right here. And how do I know that it is a y coordinate? Because there is a letter y. I labeled it earlier. There is a letter y. So what I'm going to do is I'm labeling the y coordinate that has 2 2/3. So I'm looking for 2 2/3 on here. I have 2 right here. I have 2 1/3, and I have 2 2/3. Huh. So all of these right here have 2 2/3. And look, they actually repeat H again. So I'm going to actually use a different color. I have F, I have E, I have H again, K. So these are the coordinates that need to be solved. So this one is 2 1/3. The x coordinate is at 0. So the right here would be my origin, which is 0. So I'm going to put 0 and 2 2/3. Let me move that a little higher. 0, 2, 2/3. Okay? And then I have my label for E. Okay? So I'm looking at E, and I know that my x-axis is 2/3. I'm always going to write my x-axis first because it's x, y when I write my points. You're always going to look over here. So I'm going to put 1/3. Wait, it's at 2/3. So I'm going to write 2/3. And my y is 2 2/3. So if you notice 2 2/3, it's always the same for y. I think it would be helpful if I put x and y up here for you so that you remember that. So I'm going to write x and y on the top. Okay, so that's what I did there. Now, the next mark, I have H. I already did that one, and then I have K. I notice that my X is at 5 1/3. I don't know if you guys can see that. 5 1/3 is all the way at the bottom. 5 1/3. So I'm going to write down 5 1/3 as my X. And then my Y, just like all of them, is at 2 2/3. So this is my X coordinate, and that's my Y coordinate. Okay? So the numbers that I have that are at 2 2/3 are F, E, H, and K. So that's what I'm going to write for number 2. My ruler just flew on the floor. Let me write that down. I'm going to write down, we have F, E, H, and K. Okay? Now, I forgot to read the next direction. For direction C, it asks you which point is 3 1/3 units above the x-axis and 2 2/3 units to the right of the y-axis. Name the point and give its coordinate pair. Okay? So they asked me which point is 3 1/3 above the x-axis. So I'm going to move 3 1/3 units. So to do that, I'm going to move this up to 3. So this is 3 right here, and I'm going to move it to 3 1/3. Okay, So there is only one that is at 3 1/3. So right here. Okay, that's your G. And then it says 2 2/3 units to the right of the y-axis. This is the y-axis, and I'm moving it 2 2 2/3. So right there. So that's the G. That's the G coordinate. So I'm going to label it. I have my X and my Y coordinates. And right here we have 2 2/3. And then my Y coordinate, I already told you, is 3 1/3. So I'm going to write that down, that G is the coordinate for that one. So I'm writing down G. Next, for problem number D, it says which point is located at 5 1/3 units from the y-axis. 5 1/3 units from the y-axis. This is the y-axis right here. Identify y-axis. And I'm moving it over 5 1/3. So I'm going to move it over 5 1/3, which is right here. And the only one that is right there is the letter K. So I'm going to write K for problem D. Next, for problem E, which point is located 1 2/3 units along the x-axis? So now I'm going to move this, and I'm going to move it all the way to 1 2/3. Let me circle that so you guys can see that clearly. 1 2/3. So I'm going to move from the x-axis 1 2/3. And the only one we have right